have any queries or requests for additional information, having read the report, please? I think we're content to note. So thank you very much indeed, Barry, and thank you for the opportunity to ask anything further of you, which I guess, as always with you, Barry, remains, should anybody wish to get in touch and follow up anything that arises in the report. So
absolutely, no problem.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much, Barry, and thank you, Matthew. Yeah. Moving to section 5, strategy, item 16. John, this was an opportunity, I think, for you to bring board members up to date on progress and an opportunity to comment on our corporate strategy refresh update. So yeah, shall I turn to you, John? Yeah.
Thank you, Max. Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's no need to go through the slides. I'm going to take those as read. We had a really good discussion in board development on the 8th of April. We used some interactive software. I don't know if board members remember, and we built up an idea about what our priorities were, etc. We promised to bring this back. So this is just a touch point. There'll be another opportunity, but the slides describe how we're progressing in the piece of work that the board sent us away to do. There isn't yet a draft or a document or a plan on a page to look at, but I think it's very clear from the slides what the cornerstones of this strategy will be, and all the engagement we've done. It's been far and wide. We're presenting to governors start of next week. We've done lots of work across our system. So hopefully you get a good feel from that of the work we've been doing, the direction of travel. I suppose the point I would want to flag is, more than anything else, we are really trying to focus on the partnering element of this and working across the system. So there is an ongoing discussion in our Bradford place about a strategy for the place. Mel's given the explicit commitment that we will align our respective strategies, that BTHFT and the place will have, we'll mirror each other with their strategies. There'll be some things unique to us as an acute hospital, but notwithstanding that, we expect the two things to look and feel very similar in tone, probably even in what we call them. And I'm pleased to say that both will now refer to people, partners and place, which is, we might boast and say that's something we invented here, but I think it's a positive that we're all sharing that sense of what the big priorities are. So we'll be talking about people, partners and place, and so too will the Bradford and District place. So it's here to note progress. We welcome any comments, but you don't have to do that now. The door is always open. There's a public consultation ongoing till the end of the month, and.
Thanks very much indeed, John. John, may I ask whether I guess you would want board of directors to be aware of the corporate strategy generally and all aspects of it.
Wouldn't it?
Yeah. So that's fine, and that's the purpose, of course, of this briefing. But I just wondered whether, do you think it's likely that some things might emerge that you would hope that directors begin to advocate for or to repeat? Are there any specific aspects of it that might arise that you would like to see us repeating and supporting?
Yeah, although I think, Max, the way this is created is we didn't start with a blank sheet of paper. We built on what we learned from the last strategy, what's come out of a year of COVID, what we said in our strategic plan last year, also called People, Partners, Place, and the discussions we've been having with directors. So to be honest with you, I'd be disappointed, and I wouldn't have done my job if there was some kind of bolt from the blue came out now and we were saying to directors, oh, we need you to shout about this. At the last discussion we had in board development, one of the themes that came out, and interesting, the conversation that we just had with Ray, was research and the importance of Bradford's prestigious research capacity and how we connect that to the work of the trust. So one of the areas, we do refer to this in the slides, that we'll be trying to bring some focus on in the strategy is research. So I think what would we want directors to use as a mantra? It's people, it's partners, it's place. It's the well-being of our people. Without them, we've got nothing. It's the way that everything these days is about partnership. We are stronger, we are better together, and in particular, it's our place. Bradford stands or falls together. There's no point in the acute hospital doing well and the care trust falling over, etc., etc. We are in this together. Mel talked earlier on about a single leader for the place. All of these strands come together, and we want our strategy to anticipate that and support it. And those are the lines that we'd want directors to be using.
Thank you very much indeed, John. That's really helpful. And I'm delighted to see how important the central governors have been placed in terms of the engagement work on this. So thank you. I guess at some time, John, it might be appropriate for a communication strategy, perhaps to members, and to encourage them to promote the general points of the strategy. So thank you. Really helpful update from John. The purpose was really just to bring us right up to date on progress, and of course an opportunity to comment. Does anybody have any requests for further information, details, questions? Or are we content to note the progress of the timescales with that? Looks like we are. So thank you very much indeed, John. No further questions, and we're content to note the progress and comment. Thank you. Moving now to the governance section, please. So section 6, so we've just got the 3 items there, which I think are perhaps with John, but I'll just check. It may also be with Laura. So review of standing orders at item 17. So there is we need to approve, or we've been asked to approve, please, some up to date standing orders according to the amendments required. So
yeah, I'll ask Laura if I may to do standing orders, and then I'll do the next item on governance review, please.
Thank you. Thanks. Laura, is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, thank you. So the standing orders are due to be reviewed by September this year. So we've had a look through them just to make sure that they're up to date and relevant. And we've presented the proposed changes to the audit committee, who have agreed to recommend them to the board for approval. So the changes are listed in the cover paper. It's mainly minor things just for clarification or to bring the standing orders up to date. So making sure that it's aligned with the paragraph numbers in the Constitution, which have just been altered, clarifying that we're holding meetings virtually, more as a matter of course now and not just in exceptional circumstances, and other things to reflect the new committee structure, and other minor amendments to make sure it remains up to date. I guess the biggest change is probably removing the committee terms of reference from the standing orders. So we're proposing this because it just makes the document really cumbersome, and then every time you've got a change to the terms of reference, you have to change the standing orders as well. So it just makes that a really inefficient process. But we'll make sure that those terms of reference are still publicly available through the website, and there's no reason why they can't be removed from the standing orders. I think just one thing to point out is in relation to section 5.4, which lists the committees of the board. So we may just need to make a further amendment to that depending on the decision under the next item, the governance review around the regulation and assurance committee. So if that committee is disestablished, we'll obviously remove reference to that from the standing orders as well.
I think that's understood, Laura. Thank you for that. If the board are so minded to approve that proposal. So thank you very much, Laura. Thank you for preparing a summary paper, Laura, that just reminded us of the main changes briefly, and indeed for attaching the standing orders with amendments shown so that people could see what the changes were. So that was very useful. So I'll just open up and ask whether there's any questions or queries, any requests for further information regarding those standing orders. But I think otherwise, they're probably amendments that no surprise to us, bring us right up to date. And in the absence of any questions, may I take it that the Board of Directors are content to approve these amended standing orders as proposed, please? And we note Laura's point about there may just be a slight change to the language in terms of committee terms of reference according to the next item. Is that okay? Yep. Okay, great stuff. So they're all approved, Laura. Thank you for that. And John, I think, did you say to turn to you for the governance review update, please?
Yeah, yes, please, Max. So there's 2 items in one here. The first, well, one of them is a very minor change to the terms of reference for our nominations and remuneration committee. The other is a substantive question about whether we should continue to have a separate regulation and assurance committee. So I'm going to take the smaller one first, just to kind of knock it on the head. We don't need to go through the detail of this. I'll take the paper as read. The Nominations and Remunerations Committee terms of reference, we've put them now into the standard template so they look and feel the same as the others. There's a couple of tiny textual changes in them. The only thing of any significance is that we now explicitly require that we take account of the fit and proper persons test, which we were doing anyway, but we now make it explicit on the face of the terms of reference. So I commend it to the board, and I'd seek agreement to the terms of reference as drafted.
For the Board Nominations and Remuneration Committee, John. Yeah.
That's correct. The terms
Yeah.
of reference for that committee, yes.
Yeah, good way to deal with it, John. So shall we deal with that matter first and just see whether any queries arise from that, and then if people are content to approve those proposed amendments, just briefly described by John there, we're good. So was any further detail or queries arising? Nothing? Can I take it that we do all approve the proposed amendments to the Board Nomination and Remuneration Committee? I had to check with Laura because we just always call that the REMCOM, don't we? The Remuneration Committee. So we did mean that one, yeah. So that's the committee we're talking about. Yep, and I think there is a unanimous, without objection, approval of those amendments. So thank you for that, John. So that's the third recommendation in the paper. So that's done and approved.
Okay, so really the substantive item here is about our Regulation and Assurance Committee. Again, I'm not going to repeat everything that's in the paper. I'm assuming colleagues have had a chance to read this. To get straight to the point, we are proposing that the board should consider disestablishing our Regulation and Assurance Committee. I'm conscious that some of the colleagues around the table won't have lived through this, but early on in the pandemic in 2020, we suspended a lot of our normal governance arrangements, and to ensure that we had a continuous kind of regulation check, we introduced the Regulation and Assurance Committee as an interim measure. In the autumn, in October, we made it substantive and embedded it in our ongoing arrangements, and it's continued to this day. But what's happened is it's kind of accrued. We've reintroduced board, we've got the academies, and we've got the Regulation and Assurance Committee. And we have tried quite hard to make this sensible and to make this work and to explain the differences between them and which items should go to which and to sequence them so that it kind of makes sense. And the honest truth is we're kind of tripping over our own feet here. There is too much stuff going on. There is confusion about what should happen in which forum and how the accountability works. There is overlap. I mean, we must all have thought, hang on a minute, didn't I see that paper last week in respect of risks and BAF and so on? And Pat alluded to something earlier on that she could have spoken about today, but she spoke about it last week. And to be honest, just purely in terms of governance, it raises some strange issues. We have a committee which is effectively the whole board, chaired by the chairman of the board, and it's reporting to the whole board, chaired by the chairman of the board. It's kind of circular, and it doesn't make a lot of sense. I'm not saying it was wrong to do it. I'm just saying as a board, we ought to ask ourselves now, does this continue to make sense? And it's clear from the paper, and I hope it's clear from my words, that the executive team have looked at this, and our view honestly is there's not a lot of value add here, and we feel it's time to say we don't need the Regulation Assurance Committee to continue to meet as it does at the moment. We think it would be cleaner and more effective to have the academies reporting in direct to the board, which would continue to meet every other month. There is a final point I would make, and I'm just exploiting the opportunity. Julie did ask earlier on about the sort of resilience of the exec team and how you could support us as non-execs. So I'm going to push my luck a bit and say this might be quite a practical example of that, because I have to tell you, it's a bit of a heart sink sometimes when you're trying to generate two lots of papers which feel like you're doing the same thing twice. And if I may, this would be very well received on behalf of the executive team if we could just lift that burden. And very happy to answer questions. I'm sure colleagues will also have views about this, but I know I speak for the executive team when we think we're not going to lose much if we don't have this. We could gain a lot if we have the extra capacity and the extra time. It raises a question then about the governance and leadership of the academies. And as you'll have seen from the paper, should we agree no longer to have a Regulation Assurance Committee, then we think it's perfectly reasonable to ask the question, is it time now to say that the academies should be chaired by non-execs? Because that's a more conventional governance approach that you would have non-execs chairing committees reporting into board. But I suppose we should take those as two separate questions.
Thank you very much indeed, John. John, may I ask about whether the proposal to disestablish the Regulation Assurance Committee has an implication for the nature of the work in the academies? So we're proudly promoting academies, aren't we, as being sort of equally focused on assurance, learning and improvement. And does it mean that there might be a little more attention given to the assurance role within academies, do you think? Or would we be satisfied that that can still be carried out at board, perhaps?
Yeah, I think the latter. I think it's just that the board becomes well, it always was the assuring body, but it doesn't now get duplicated in RegCom. I think the academies and the model that's still evolving, but the model that we've developed is that academies do assurance better when they also look at learning and improvement, and that doesn't change. What changes is where the results of the work of the academy lands is in board, and we have one conversation. I mean, I dread to say this for colleagues around the table. It might mean our board meeting gets a little longer. I don't know, but I don't think removing RegCom has implications for academies. I think it has implications for board. But given the amount of overlap already, it's certainly not a doubling. I just think there's something about maybe the depth of the assurance we need to do in board, and looking at risk register and BAF and things like that. I think that's the implication.
Yes, I accept that. Thank you, John. Thanks. So I'll open up for any comments, thoughts or questions. Ray, would you like to come in first, and then Barry? So Ray first, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So although I don't think this is tied into the continuation or not of Regulation and Assurance Committee, I think the point you made about the assurance part of the work of the academies, I think does need to be considered. I think particularly for Quality Academy, the agenda is so busy because, of course, quality potentially touches on anything we do in the organisation out of necessity. So I think, you know, we have had these conversations already, whether we need to do something within the academy working in parallel that is a little bit more focused on the assurance side of it, and leaving the Quality Academy for more that sort of learning and improvement, which is really at the core of what an academy should be. But I don't think that's tied into RegCom, but I think certainly for the Quality Academy, that's something we're very conscious of, and we're thinking how we can address that.
Yeah, that's helpful to know. Thank you, Ray. That's really useful context. Barry, would you like to come in, and then Julie?
The RegCom was right for its time, but that time, I agree, is now past. I think it's important that we dispense with it and move to a position where the board deals with, if you think about the last 2 weeks, deals in substance with what we've covered today and what we covered in Reg Committee last week. That will result in some duplication being removed. But I think it'd be a useful exercise to say, well, if you remove that duplication, how much time would it require for us to conduct the last 2 weeks of RegCom and board business in a board meeting going forwards? I'm not looking to sort of swallow time, but I think it's important that we have sufficient time to deal with things correctly. I think one added benefit of dispensing with the Reg Committee, and this is a point that I raised with you, Max, some time ago.
Yes.
But by putting particularly assurance matters into RegCom, you could argue that there were aspects of governance that should have been subject to public scrutiny that ceased to be sort of subject to public scrutiny in full detail. So I think it's the right move. Let's get on and do it.
Yeah, really helpful input. Thank you, Barry, and a really useful perspective as well, of course, from the chair of the Audit Committee in terms of that where assurance ought to be sought and discussed. So yes, thank you, Barry. Yeah, Julie, would you like to come in, and then Selina?
Barry said most of it. So yes, support it. Yes, the right thing to do. Of course, we need to work on what the academies do and how we make the board more efficient, but they're work in progress, and we continue to do that even if we get rid of the Regulation Committee. So dead supportive. Great stuff, Julie. Thank you. Thanks. And by the way, just to assure executive colleagues, this isn't so. Although of course non-execs have discussed the nature of the ward-to-board assurance, this isn't a debate that we've particularly had in detail about whether we keep the RegCom going or not. So this is great. So this is a genuinely open debate and discussion, and pleased to hear Barry and Julie's thoughts on that. Selina, would you like to come in?
Yes, thanks. 2 points. First of all, I think the experience of the Academy has been, and this is specific around the People Academy, has been very positive. I think we do have some great discussions and deep dives into topics which have been quite sticky and quite difficult in the past to get into, and I think we've done that quite successfully. I think where we probably need to really focus on is obviously the assurance side, but also the challenge, because I think a lot of the challenge comes from the non-execs. We don't see that level of challenge coming from the other members of the Academy. So it's 1 or 2 people who ask the questions, and it's how do we get that broader culture of challenge, not just from 1 or 2 individuals.
That's in the spirit of encouraging a wider engagement.
Absolutely.
And inquisitive inquiry.
Absolutely, and I think it'd be really good to have it because we have a cross section of staff involved in the academies, so we need to encourage those different voices to come forward and share their perspective, because they will see the organisation from a different angle to how we see the organisation, and to be able to hear from them and triangulate what we're seeing in the papers would be really positive. And the second issue is, how do we get that line of sight into the organisation, given the fact that we're not doing the walkabouts and talking and that physical presence. That's quite challenging, and how do we make that more meaningful? First get this line of sight and then make that more meaningful.
Great stuff, Selena. That's really helpful input. Thank you. So we're hearing, I think, support across the board for the idea of disestablishing the Regulation Assurance Committee. I think a very strong acceptance that actually it was a really good idea in the first place, when the time was there for it needed, no committees, for example, that it was the right thing to do. And of course, we held it monthly to start with, didn't we? So that's coming through clear. And I think I've picked up certainly on the point about some attention being paid to the relationship between assurance, learning and improvement at academies, in the context, as Selena said, of encouraging a wider inquisitive inquiry and contribution and engagement and debate amongst members. So we're hearing that closely. And then some attention to the right way in which the work of the academies might report to board, and that we don't necessarily, well, where appropriate, don't repeat things here, but we've got to think about how we manage our time well in board to achieve the assurance role that's required of us by the Constitution, of course, as Barry sort of pointed out at the start here. So that's excellent. So may I ask whether, does anybody, I'm proposing that this board approves the recommendation to disestablish the Regulation and Assurance Committee. I know we've got another debate to have about who runs academies, but the proposal to disestablish the R&A Committee, would anybody require any further comment, question, detail? I'm going to put it that the board does indeed approve that. Would anybody wish to record their objection to that proposal? It would appear not. I think we have a unanimous approval, John, given the briefing you helpfully gave us and the issues that have been discussed, which I assume, John, are accepted by you as Director of Strategy and Integration, that you find those comments fair, and the attention that we've talked about giving certain things is reasonable.
Yeah, really helpful. And I would remind board we've got an ongoing review of the academies just to make sure the way they work is optimal, and that will come back to board in the autumn. So yes, it's all good. It's all helpful input. Thank you.
Yeah, great stuff. So we have unanimous approval, John, for that. As
Matt,
well as
I note Mel's got her hand up. Sorry, I just note Mel's got her hand up.
Oh,
I'm not sure
sorry,
if it was on that point.
Yeah, would you like to come in, Mel? Apologies.
Yes, Chair, if I may, just a couple of observations. So, and it's not to unpick the decision, because I wholeheartedly support that. It's just an observation about the efficacy of the Regulation Committee. So just an observation, because I think this is an important one. It's the one that is it's everybody's concerned. And it's the point that Ray's made. It's about the balance of assurance and development and learning.
Yes.
And so my overriding observation when I came into this organisation, that there was an imbalance in that many of the conversations that were happening at subcommittee level, and I'll throw in the mix also at Council of Governors, was too much orientated towards assurance and not enough about, you know, the narrative conversations, the quality developments, the service improvements, etc. For me, it was timely to put the regulation committee in, not just for COVID, because we actually started this journey before COVID, and it was helpful that COVID came along and we could use it as a vehicle, but as a circuit break to allow a transition into a different format and to reassure people that we could safely make that transition. And that transition was to a learning academy style approach that now can redress the balance and introduce the assurance parts of it and can do more. And I think what we've done is a very safe way of transitioning to a different style of operating. So I think this is the final sort of step in that. Just wanted to pick up on the point that Selina made, because I can understand completely how if you attend some of those meetings, you could be struck by the impression that there isn't challenge necessarily from other people. But I think what I would say is that there's almost a hierarchy, if you like, the way the organised setup of conversations that are being had. And when you get to the academy level or a subcommittee of the board, that's almost like the final bit of the conversation. And many of those individuals who sit round those tables have had the same conversation in many different areas before it gets to that place. And so much of the challenge has already happened within the organisation to get to a place where in the hierarchy of meetings and conversations, we're talking about things a little bit more strategically and for a different sort of audience. So it's just to assure people that it's not a case that people come to this and never come to a subject fresh and don't challenge. They're actually probably quite familiar with the subject, it having been discussed in a CBU governance setting, then in a work stream of the academy or a subcommittee or a steering group of the academy, and then that eventually gets transposed into the conversations at academy level. So, you know, just a couple of observations about, I think it's worked okay, the time is right to change it back.
Thanks very much, Mel. Really useful context. And Karen, would you like to come in?
Yeah, so absolutely agree with all of the proposals. The one thing I would say, I'm probably going to embarrass Selina slightly. So we recruit our NEDs to have a wide variety of skills and knowledge that they can bring to the discussion. I've learnt more from Selina in the past few months as a member of the People Academy than I did when Selina was chairing what was workforce. And I think there's something about we need to make sure that we're not just chairs and we actively participate in the discussion, because it's really, really hard, isn't it, when you're trying to keep a meeting going, keeping an eye on the time, and then actually having a point and bringing something. So my plea is that, you know, we all have something to bring, and even if you're chairing, please continue to bring that as well. I know it sounds dead obvious, but it was just really stark to me, especially in that People Committee Academy.
Oh, no, that's great stuff, Karen. Of course, that nicely segues us then into the final thing that we might want to consider and determine whether we're able to make a decision today. So I think we have unanimously agreed that we will disestablish the Regulation and Assurance Committee. It was right for its time, but we'll now find a new way to hear directly from academies into board and assure ourselves at board about the work that's underway. The question is, who should run the academies? And as you'll see from John's paper here, John, if you don't mind me just reading that small bit, it's recommended that consideration be given to all academies being chaired by a non-executive director to ensure appropriate independence in line with normal requirements of good governance and to facilitate the opportunity for non-executive challenge and support in the academy discussions. John, is there anything else you'd wish to bring to the board's attention regarding that proposal, please?
No, just to make the rather obvious point that we already have a mixed model. We've got one academy which is chaired by a NED and two which are chaired by the execs. And so nothing is sacred here. We can do whatever we think is right.
Yeah. John, would a NED chaired academy, would that mean that the NED would have a say on the agenda, on agenda planning, for example? Are we thinking that sort of thing, and some control over the nature of the meeting?
Yeah, I think that's what a chair should do, absolutely. But I also think that the relevant execs would be, would want to work closely with the chair, whoever the chair was, to make sure that you had the right discussion in the right place at the right time. I think we're a sufficiently mature board that we'd all want that. So yes.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you. Thanks very much indeed. So may I ask whether there are any questions, thoughts, further detail that might be required on this proposal, that we actually move to a situation of non-executive leadership, actually, within our academies, and in the context that we've been discussing about, that there'll be no longer a regulation committee, and so there will be some attention required to be given to assurance functions as well as learning and improvement. Nobody wants to lose that, I'm sure. But actually a great opportunity for non-execs to start to shape the discussions, the detail, the priorities, and the nature of the debate. Barry, shall I bring you in, please?
I'm just struck by and reflecting on Karen's comments of a few minutes ago. I fully subscribe to the fact that chairing a meeting to some extent restricts your ability to think freely and contribute as a member of an academy. I think we just need to bear that in mind in thinking about who we appoint as chairs and who amongst the NEDs we leave free to be a member of the academy and free to really figuratively roll up the sleeves and add comments, suggestions and challenges along the way. Yes, no, fair point. And I'll open up you've laid down a great point there, Barry. I'll open up for any further comments or questions or detail that might be related to that. But Karen, shall I bring you in, please?
Thanks. So Ray and I actually currently jointly chair the Quality Academy, which means that, 1 month somebody's chairing, the other one can participate more and doesn't have to have the focus on that. So we swap it round so we can both input. So why don't we do a similar model with NEDs and have 2 NEDs that alternate the chair?
Okay.
Just a suggestion.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. Yeah. So that's certainly a possibility. I know it was something I never liked in a lay role at the CCG. You did that because you built up over time. It was better to chair the committee for a while yourself. You could start to shape it. But that is a fair point, Karen. Yeah, because sometimes that can be a more effective working model. Any other thoughts or questions? I really would like to hear from any non-executive colleagues and guests, given that you've perhaps not had the opportunity to think about this beforehand or to discuss it in more detail. Karen, would you like to come in with a comment, please?
Yes, thanks, Max. I'd just like to address the point about chairing and contributing and challenging, because Julie's a great example of how that happens. So I think when you've got a grip on the agenda and you've helped shape that agenda, sometimes it is easier to challenge anyway. So whilst I acknowledge it could be a problem, I'm not sure how big a problem it would be.
Good point. Yeah. Thank you for that. Thanks, Karen. And any other final thoughts or comments? Julie, would you like to come in? Yeah, please.
And maybe we don't need to be the same for everything. So for F&P, Saj, Matthew and I do it together as a trio. And to me, it wouldn't really matter which of us would chair, but we talk to each other and we do it. And we know we've still got things to do, but maybe we don't need to fix to model that only one thing works. Maybe they're different and they can be different, and it might depend on preferences. So I don't know, to me, if it's a black and white answer or what works for which academy.
Yeah, very good point, Julie. Very good point. And actually, quite an attractive model, isn't it, to have different working models between the 3 academies? Yeah, that's great. Okay, shall I just ask John? May I just return to you then, please, and ask whether did you have any views on, assuming board might approve this idea that we move to NED leadership on the academies? Did you have a view, or had you had the chance to take a view on how you might develop that model and try and bring people together and get a kind of agreed way of working it, etc.? Or is that something you're going to remit to me?
Not in the level of detail that we've talked about it here this morning. And yes, it's a conversation we'd need to have, but I mean, not wishing to be flippant, it's the least of our worries. Let's get the basics in place, and then let's have the conversation about how we make it a success. I think I'm agnostic. Whichever way we did this, we could make it work. But I think the proposal here is a good one, and squares with good governance that we have NEDs leading. Whether there's one or two is a detail we can discuss offline, and how we make it work.
Yes, yeah. Thanks very much, John. Thank you. So there we go. So that's great, isn't it? So we've got a proposal that's arisen from our executive colleagues suggesting that actually maybe we do need a bit more independent leadership of our academies, and it's a great opportunity to facilitate NED challenge and support in those discussions. It will be non-executive colleagues who are driving the agenda, who are prioritising, who are stopping and saying, I just want a bit more detail on that. So that's the kind of thing that I think can be an extremely positive example of shared decision-making amongst boards. So, however, I respect if anybody takes a different view or would wish to articulate that, but I think we'll probably have the chance now, have we, to invite that comment. And yeah, I think hopefully we probably feel comfortable with the discussions that have taken place, and we've picked up on some of the work to be done. So like Barry said about the difference between being a good, strong contributor and actually simply chairing a meeting. And nobody wants to encourage an independent chair in the sense of taking no interest in the matters and acting as a referee. So that's something we can begin to build up, isn't it, as we do things. So and I'm saying all this in the assumption, I think, that there is support for this idea of non-executive leadership of our academies. Would anybody wish to object to that proposal, may I ask? Because otherwise I'm going to take it as unanimously supported. We know there's still some work to be done, and that'll happen naturally, as John rightly pointed out, as well as people begin to get their feet under the table and we talk together and say that bit's not quite as powerful as this bit, and we can get things better. So, okay, are we content to support that? Yeah, it's the resumption of non-executive led committees, now called academies in our trust, because they have we've always said, haven't we, an equal focus on assurance, learning and improvement. And we've some work to do in terms of thinking about, okay, so what's that mean for reporting to board, and how do we make sure that board can be sufficiently focused on the assurance matters that arise. And there's a nice link there to some of the work we'll be doing on board assurance framework, John, as well, isn't there, which we tend to run a session on and start to get that agreed and supported by all of us. So thank you, everybody, and I think there is unanimous support, therefore, for that suggestion. John, I think, did the paper say that you might propose beginning those in September, the NED leadership?
Yeah, that's correct. We can move fairly quickly to that arrangement. I mean, look, we need to have the conversations, but I see no reason why not.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks very much indeed. So, yeah, content to do that. Laura, did you want to say anything about this particular item?
No, I don't think I've got anything to add to what's already been said. I'll just be repeating, so I will do.
Okay, no, that's great. I think there's some work coming your way, probably, in terms of pulling people together and just making sure there's good opportunity for anybody to contribute to the best way to achieve this. But I think this is good news, and I'm delighted board feel comfortable with the idea. And I think we're going to see some really thriving academies here working towards a board that does the assurance oversight. So great stuff. Yeah, thanks everybody, and thank you, John, for the time that you took to take us through that. Paul, I'll turn to you, and we're being asked to ratify the decision taken in relation to data security and protection toolkit. Did you wish to bring any particular aspect of it back to board attention in order to help us determine if we're content to ratify?
Not particularly, Max. It's a sort of procedural item insofar as the way in which we're an accident to the calendar this year in terms of having to make a formal return in a cycle that just stepped outside RegCom and board, and therefore yourself and Mel effectively took action on behalf of the whole board to say, yes, we can submit this, and so it's procedural from my perspective to just make sure the whole board underscore that the actions that you and Mel took on the organisation's behalf are the appropriate actions to take.
Thanks very much, Paul. And of course, we also had the assistance of Barry and Altaf as two non-executive colleagues, and I confirm, as Paul touched on there, that I was well briefed as to what was required in terms of the decision, and very content to support in terms of good governance. So our board comfortable to ratify. Barry and Altaf, I'll obviously give you the opportunity to say anything should you wish, but assuming you've no further comment to make yourselves, I'll take it that you're happy to ratify as being asked of board, and that went in on the 29th of June. Comfortable, board? Yeah, it was properly dealt with, I assure you. Thank you very much. Oh, Altaf, did you want to speak?
No. I was just saying I'm happy to support. I'm glad I'm not doing the trusts. I usually do my own companies, which is considerably shorter than the one that Paul has to submit. Thank you.
Yeah, we do the long ones, don't we? Thanks very much, Altaf. That's great. Okay, so we're content to do that. I think we've got to the end of all our business. We have no other business to deal with. So I'll draw your attention, of course, to the annexes, which are important documents. We've got the different dashboards, strategic risk register, board assurance framework, etc., and our finance report. And then under information reports received by board committees, helpfully, we've got the stuff that came to RegCom last week, the maternity services stuff. Freedom to Speak Up annual report is appended. I would recommend people have a look at that. There's some good work by good people. The 8 guardians we've got doing some really good work there. Quality oversight report and the medical appraisal and revalidation annual report is there. And then we have some minutes of different meetings, including RegCom, Audit Committee and Chancellor Uplands Committee, all appended for our attention. So in the absence of other business, I should perhaps just pause and ask whether we've had a great meeting for me. There's been some terrific debate. The stuff on children's services, the stuff on learning disabilities, the stuff on disability equality. That makes me very proud to be chairman of this organisation who's genuinely trying to tackle health inequalities and giving proper time to that consideration at the board of directors. So thank you very much. In that same spirit, I'm sorry if some of the data and detail didn't quite have the time that we might have been able to give to it in terms of a presentation, but I hope you'll agree that everybody has had the chance to press pause and just say, I do have a question I want to raise there. But there's been great contribution from everybody, so thank you. If perhaps John Holden, did you pick up anything, John, that you would wish to see reported elsewhere arising from today, other than the actions raised, of course?
Yeah, only coming out of the actions raised, Max. There's nothing else in particular I think we need to worry about. Thanks.
Yeah, no, and that's how I feel. And in the absence of any other comment to that, that's where we are. That's great. So we've got a kind of week coming up, haven't we? Of just to let you know that Mel and I will be representing the trust next Tuesday at the West Yorkshire Association of Acute Trusts, and I know that the Academies are due to run out there on the Wednesday, the 28th. So good luck with all those, and indeed may they be the last ones that exec led, perhaps. Anyway, except in your case, Julie, you run yours anyway, don't you? So okay, so we've got there's lots coming up, and we meet together, of course, again as a board on the 23rd of September. Can I suggest that we take just 5 minutes and then we'll go into and deal with the closed board sessions, but hopefully we'll still deal with everything that we've got in the timescale that we'd allocated ourselves. But I will close this open board meeting by repeating the board of directors' congratulations to Selina and thanking her so much for the 6 years that you've given to this trust and more, Selina. I know there is more. But very well done to you. Many congratulations on your appointment at Derbyshire. It's very well deserved. We'll miss you, but it's great to still have you as a friend, Selina, here. So, Selina, if you wanted to say anything finally, I'll close the meeting with your final words, perhaps.
Just a big thank you to everybody. I've had a phenomenal time with everyone. Really enjoyed working with you all. I will miss you, but no doubt I will be learning and taking the learning from Bradford to Derbyshire. And just good luck with everything that you're doing, and watch with eager eyes and head and heart to see you all succeed in what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you, and very well done, Selena. You have a lot of friends here, and I'm glad you'll still keep in touch with us and be a critical friend of the Trust. Will continue, so that's great news. Thanks, everybody. I'm sorry we did run over a little bit, but thanks so much, everybody, for being here. Steph, great to see you. Thank you for joining us at this. That's great. And I'll close this open board committee